Welcome to the AlphaMirrorless podcast, part of the TWIP network.
Hi, I'm Juan Pons from the AlphaMirrorless podcast. And as you may know, the recently announced Sony Alpha 6500 camera has started shipping. I actually got mine just last week and I've been actually really enjoying the camera. But now Sony has 3 different cameras on the a6000 line, which has prompted a lot of you to send us questions on the AlphaMirrorless podcast. So I thought I'd do this special video for you guys, talking about the new 6500 and comparing it a little bit with the a6000 as well as the a6300. You may be wondering yourself, why does Sony have 3 different cameras, especially released so close to each other in the market out there at different price levels? If you look at, for example, the a6000, this camera comes in now at $399. That's, the suggested retail price. Recently reduced, this is a permanent reduction from Sony, makes a great little inexpensive camera. The a6300 coming in at about $1,000, $999. Again, suggested retail price set by Sony. And with the new 6500 coming in at $1,400, there's a pretty big difference in price between it. It's $1,000 between the 6000 and the 6500. So let's talk a little bit about what's new on the 6500. The biggest thing for a lot of us, including myself, is going to be the IBIS, or in-body image stabilization. For those of you that don't know what IBIS is, or in-body image stabilization, you're probably familiar with image stabilization on Canon lenses or vibration reduction on Nikon lenses. And what that does is allow you to handhold the camera in those situations where your shutter speed may actually be somewhat slow. Well, in-body image stabilization is very similar to that, except that instead of being on the lens itself, that image stabilization happens inside the camera. What that does is that it makes all of your lenses, whether they are image stabilized or not, image stabilized now. Now, image stabilization works in conjunction also with the optical image stabilization that may be on your lenses as well to make that image stabilization even better. But what's great is that you can use just about any lens that's out there, including older manual focus lenses from Nikon even, and make those image stabilized with this body, which is huge in itself. Another feature that's really important to a lot of us, including myself, is the expanded buffer in this camera. The 6000 as well as the 6300 and the 6500 have very fast frame rates, up to 11 frames per second, which is great for action photography and wildlife photography. But what's unique about the 6500 is that it can actually buffer your images. If you're shooting JPEG, it has a buffer that can hold up to 307 images, which is unprecedented. If you're shooting RAW, we're talking about 107 images. What that means is that you can hold that shutter down at 11 frames per second and hold it down for 10 seconds and get, actually 30 seconds, right? And get, if you're shooting JPEG, and be able to capture all those images, almost like shooting a mini movie. Just incredible. Now, in addition to that, what's great about the new buffer is that in contrast with the 6000 and the a6300, the buffer does not prevent you from reviewing your images. You can actually review the images that your camera has taken while the buffer is still writing. That was something that one of my biggest complaints on the 6300 and 6000 is that while those images are writing, you cannot review the work that you've done. With the 6300, you still cannot get into the menu system and change menus, but you can actually change some of the functions of the camera by hitting the function button or by changing the dial and continue shooting after that, or even review some images. In addition to that, there's a handy new indicator on the viewfinder or on the LCD on the back, showing you how many images are left to write out on the buffer and giving you a little graphic indication as it's writing the images out. Huge improvement, especially for us that shoot wildlife or action photography. just incredible. Another thing that's new on the 6500 is the new menu system. If you listen to the AlphaMirrorless podcast, you've heard me complain about the menu system on the AlphaMirrorless cameras. It's not the best that's out there. I came from the Canon world, and that menu, very well thought out, very well done, easy to access. Yes, I've been using those cameras for over a decade, so I knew where everything was in those menus. But the menus on the Alpha cameras seemed like they weren't really well thought out. Well, the new 6500 has a new menuing system where they seem to have taken the time to actually organize it a lot better than the previous menu was. So it's easier to find things that make, they are grouped together. Items are grouped together in a way that makes sense. It makes it easy to find what you're looking for in there. Now, it still doesn't have one of the things I've been asking for, which is a custom menu like I used to have on my Canon system. And what I mean by that is a page on the menu system that I can add my most frequently accessed menu items. Because typically, I only really need to access, less than a dozen items on the menu system all that often. And it was great to be able to customize one page to include all those items in it. Unfortunately, that's not in there, but we'll keep talking about it. Hopefully Sony will listen and we'll add those in there at some point in the future. The 6500 continues the tradition of the 6300 having what I call the live viewfinder. One of the disadvantages, one of the areas where the mirrorless cameras kind of fell behind the DSLRs was in the viewfinder. The optical viewfinder it's great because it allows you to track fast action, very, very well. Because the screen, you're actually looking at, through the viewfinder, you're looking at what's occurring in front of the camera. With a lot of mirrorless systems, the viewfinder, being electronic, lag behind, the real world. The new 6300 and 6500 have a almost live viewfinder. Makes it absolutely, essential to shoot wildlife and fast action. Again, the 6500 continues that. It works really, really well for keeping track of fast-moving subjects. The autofocus system on the 6500 continues on, similar to the 6300, an amazing, very, very fast and accurate autofocus system. Works remarkably well, even when using adapted lenses using like the Metabones adapter. That's the adapter that I use for some of the few Canon lenses that I still have on the long end, especially my Canon 100-400 Mark II, which is one of my favorite long lenses that's out there. The autofocus, the 4D autofocus on these cameras have something like 425 autofocus points using both phase detect, a hybrid system of phase detect and contrast detection technologies. I say it's probably the best autofocus system that's out there, and I have been extremely happy with it. I've gotten better results than I was getting with traditional DSLRs behind that. One item that my co-host on the AlphaMirrorless podcast has been complaining about is the lack of touchscreen on the Alpha cameras. Well, starting with the 6500, we're starting to see touchscreen technology added to these cameras and lagging a little bit behind a lot of the other cameras out there, frankly. And I think folks will be a little disappointed as to what is available for the touchscreen. No, you cannot use the touchscreen to pinch zoom the images that are on the camera. You can basically use it mostly for touch focus, meaning you can touch the screen and have the camera focus on the part of the image that you're focusing, or the part of the image that you're touching. Makes it a lot easier, especially when your camera, when you're using the viewfinder or the LCD on the back to actually focus. But it actually is also very nice to use when you're shooting through the viewfinder, because you can use the touchscreen on the back almost like a trackpad. So while you're looking through the viewfinder, you can actually use your thumb, your right thumb, and actually change the focus point or track your subject in the image by moving your thumb around, making it a lot more natural, as opposed to using a little joystick or whatnot to actually move those focus points. Using that touchscreen on the back makes it a lot easier to move those focus points. That's not usually how I shoot, but for folks that like to move those focal points around, that touchscreen is huge. Okay, those are the big features of the 6500. Let's talk a little bit about the ergonomics on the camera and compare it a little bit to the other cameras. One of the advantages that we tout a lot when we talk about mirrorless cameras is not only the size and the weight. When you're looking at these cameras, they're very lightweight compared to a DSLR, but they're starting to get a little beefier. When we look at the a6000, we're talking about a camera that weighs about 10 ounces. Going up to the 6300, we're talking about 13 ounces. Going all the way to the 6500, we're talking 16 ounces, almost a pound. And a lot of that is because of the added features. When we look at the size, the 6000 continues to be a really nice and small camera. Really thin, especially on the bottom, very lightweight. But for me, that's actually has been a drawback because the camera is so small and I don't have particularly large hands. When I'm using this camera all day long, my hands tend to tire very easily and cramp up because the camera is so small, especially around the grip area. The 6300 actually improved upon that a little bit. The camera became a little thicker and the grip a little bit bigger as well compared to the 6000. But it's still, I have found this camera to be, my hands getting tired after shooting with this camera all day long. One of the great things about the new 6500 is that although they did not make the camera any bigger, any thicker, which for me was important because I'm able to use my really right stuff L bracket that from the 6300 with the 6500 because it fits perfectly. The dimensions on the bottom are exactly the same. However, a couple of things that they've improved from the ergonomics perspective are around the grip itself. This grip is actually a lot thicker than the 6300. I'm going to put them here side by side so you can compare them. You can see how that grip on the 6300 or 6500 is a lot bigger, which makes it a lot more comfortable to actually wrap your hands around and cradles your hands a lot, for me, a lot more comfortable. Another great thing that they've added is this little thumb grip right here on the back of the camera where your thumb rests is actually substantially more pronounced on the 6500 as compared to the 6300, adding again to the comfort and ergonomics of this camera. Let's look at some of the other smaller things around the camera that have been improved on the 6500 that I'm really finding are a pleasure to use. We were talking about the grip a second ago. Let's actually compare the shutter button on the 6500. Substantially bigger than it is on the 6300. You can compare those two right there. You can see how the 6500 is a lot bigger, has a better feel to it as well. The 6300 shutter button is the same exact one as it was on the 6000. So having that bigger shutter button is actually a little bit more comfortable. Has a better, like I said, a better feel to it as well. In addition to that, they've added a second custom button on the top of the camera, like we've had with the, here I'm trying to find where my 7000 or A7 is. If you look at the A7 camera, on the A7 we had two custom buttons right up here, right above our shutter. Now we have the same two custom buttons on the 6500. If you compare it to the a6300 and the 6000, those only had one custom button, making a big difference for me specifically because I rely on those two buttons quite a bit to change my focus modes and focus points and the focus areas as well. So having that extra custom button makes the 6500 a lot easier to use coming from my A7 because I shoot with those cameras interchangeably quite a bit. Having kind of very similar button layouts makes a big difference. Another item that I'm really enjoying is the texture on the dial, the wheel on the back, on the top of the camera. It's actually similar now to what the mode button or the mode wheel is. It's kind of a texture button or texture on the wheel itself. If you compare it to the 6300 and 6000, the texture is a little bit different. It's actually more lines, not this knurled texture that you have on the new 6500. Makes it a little bit grippier to me. The feel of that dial is exactly the same between the two cameras. I haven't noticed any difference between those two, but just having that different texture makes that button a little bit grippier and easier to use. Feels a lot better against my thumb. Another thing that I've actually really enjoyed is the new buttons. All these new buttons on the back of the camera are raised compared to the previous buttons. Again, talking about ergonomics, these little changes make a big difference. I can feel these buttons a lot better when I'm shooting with this camera without having to take my eye off the camera. I can just feel those as I move my thumb around the back of the camera a lot better than on the 6300. The 6300 had really nice flat buttons. These raised buttons just feel a lot better than the previous buttons. Now the wheel on the back to me is exactly the same as it is on the 6300. Absolutely no change there, including the record button. No change there at all. Another welcome change for me has been the eye cup on the 6500. For those of you that have used the 6000 or the 6300, one of the problems and one of the complaints that we had about these eye cups is that they tend to come off really easily, especially when you're taking your camera off the bag. They just kind of pop out because they're just held in there by friction. There's kind of little notches in there, but they come off really easily. And I know a lot of folks that have lost a lot of these eye cups quite frequently. The new 6500, the eye cup, is actually a slide mechanism. So it's actually a lot harder for those eye cups to come out. So we're going to be losing a lot less of these compared to the previous cameras. It makes a big difference for me, because shooting without an eye cup is absolutely no fun. I used to carry an extra eye cup with me for that specific reason. Now I don't need to worry about those as much anymore. Another nice tiny, but it's a tiny little change, is on the camera, on the battery access door. The little release on the battery is a lot easier to use. I've always found the other one, the one on the 6000, the 6300, kind of difficult to use, especially with gloves. That little new battery release latch is a little bigger and easier to access. And as we know, these little batteries, we go through them quite a bit. I use 2 or 3 of these a day, and making it a little easier to actually move those out or remove those is a welcome addition. As a matter of fact, the 6500, at least the specs on from Sony, state that the 6500 gets about 310 shots from one battery versus 360 from the a6000. So we're going to be replacing those batteries, that much more often. Okay, one last thing that I want to talk to you guys about is the lens mount. One of the complaints that I used to have about the 6000 was that this lens mount, when you put a lens on, I'm going to grab this this lens over here. When you put this lens mount on, when you put a lens on the 6000, there's quite a bit of play. I don't know if you can see that in the video. Maybe be hard to show, but there's quite a bit of play in there, which is not something that I like to see all that much. When we moved over to the 6300, we saw a lot less play and a lot better mounting experience. That lens just felt like it was going in there, a little bit more friction, and even though there's some play in there, it's just minuscule, hardly noticeable at all. When we move over to the 6500, we'll put this on. This lens, there's a significantly more friction as that lens goes in, And there is absolutely no play in there at all. Feels a lot more solid. I know, again, small thing, but all these little things show you the evolution that these cameras have taken from, going from the 6000 all the way to the 6500. Now, we have 3 cameras here. I'm going to put these back on. I'm going to put a different lens on this 6000. 3 cameras here from Sony. And you may be wondering, why 3 cameras? Well, not everybody has the same needs. And not everybody has the same budget. I see these cameras having different uses for different kinds of people. For me, the 6500 is a huge and welcome improvement over the previous 2, even over the 6300. Only if I consider the ergonomics alone, that's worth it for me. As a professional, having that bigger grip, making that much more comfortable to use, it's going to make it that much more pleasurable to use when I'm using the camera all day long, compared to the 6300 or the 6000, which was making my hands get actually tired as the day wore on. In addition to that, the IBIS is a huge addition. So for me, someone who does a lot of action photography, especially wildlife, having the improved autofocus, having the deeper raw buffer, and having the ergonomics makes well worth an upgrade, even from the 6300, definitely from the 6000, 6300. Now, if you're looking for a little walk-around camera, travel camera that you're not really shooting with, or shooting as a professional, or on a dedicated photo trip, you're just going out on a family adventure traveling, or you're looking for a gift for someone who's not necessarily a photo enthusiast, you can beat the 6000 at $399. It is, I believe, the best bargain around for a camera, for the image quality, the autofocus, the frame rate. Absolutely pleasurable to use. If you pair it along with, one of my favorite little walkabout lenses, this 16-50 from Sony is one of the kit lenses you can get with a 6000. Makes for a really nice compact camera. Has a powered zoom as well. This becomes a 24-70 lens, which is just a very versatile lens to have. I know a lot of folks have complained about the quality of this lens. Yeah, it is not the best quality, but for family pictures, a family holiday trip or something like that, this is more than enough. And it's just such a nice, compact, and inexpensive kit that this could actually become a great gift for somebody who's looking for a camera for the holidays. If you wanted to upgrade the lens, I would recommend the Sony size 16-70. Great little lens. I absolutely love this lens. A little bigger than the 16-50. This becomes a 24-105 equivalent lens, which is just an absolute perfect focal range for everyday, or even walkabout photography. A little bit more expensive lens. We're talking about a little bit over $1,000, or around $1,000. Great lens though. Nice zoom. Still small, but not, a little bit bigger than the 16-50, but not overly so. Just absolutely pleasure to use. Now, the question becomes, who is the a6300 for? And I have to say that I find it hard to find a use case for the 6300 now that the 6500 is out. Besides the price difference of $400 between the 6500 and the 6300, if you can afford it, or if you can wait and save a little bit more money to upgrade to the 6500 over 6300, I would absolutely encourage you to do that. As I mentioned earlier, the IBIS, the ergonomics, just those 2 features alone are well worth the price difference between the two. But if you're looking for something a little better than the 6000, better autofocus specifically, you can't beat the 6300, at $1,000 compared to $400, and then compared to $1,400. So Again, the 6000, I would say that this is a great sort of walkabout camera, amateur photographer, incredible image quality, great ergonomics, great ease of use. If you're looking for a great action camera, the 6500 is the camera for you. Well, I hope that you have found this video useful. And if you want to learn more about the Alpha cameras or even these cameras, I encourage you to subscribe to the AlphaMirrorless podcast. You can reach my co-host Andy Williams and I at AlphaMirrorless.com. And by the way, we don't just talk about Alpha mirrorless cameras or Sony Alpha mirrorless cameras. We talk about all sorts of other photography topics, from shooting landscapes to wildlife. We answer questions that you may have, whether they're related to Sony equipment or just, photography questions in general. Make sure that you send those in. You can go to the website. You'll find a contact us link there, so you can send questions to us. Just to give an example, just recently we had an episode suggested by one of our listeners, strictly about panorama photography. Absolutely awesome in all the information that we gave you guys there. I can't think of a better resource, in my humble opinion, on the internet in regards to not only Sony Alpha mirrorless cameras, but in photography in general. So, hope that you guys subscribe, if you already do, to the Alpha Mirrorless podcast. Until next time, take care.